Welcome in the book of John. We have finally reached the very last chapter. It's an interesting chapter. We are going to dive straight into it. It starts with the words afterward. Now, when you interpret narrative, through what you're looking for is a change of a location, or a change of time, or a change of people, in order to find where a new section should start. Now, in this verse, it gives you two of those. It says afterward, which gives us a difference in time. So afterward, after the appearance, the first two appearances after Jesus' resurrection, it says after that, and also it moves on to say they are not in Jerusalem, but by the Sea of Galilee. So that's a change of location, which gives you the idea that, or an indication that this is a new scene altogether. It's a new story within, maybe a new message of his own. So afterward, Jesus appears. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to mark first all the things that Jesus does, whether he is speaking or whether he's doing something. So first of all, he calls out. I'm going to run through this quickly. They were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. The reason I mark that is because Jesus caused it to happen. It's a miraculous catch, and it's something that Jesus caused to happen. Said the net wasn't torn, verse 11. Again, it's something that I believe that goes with the miraculous catch. Jesus caused the net not to be torn. Again, they said, he took the bread and gave it to them. It was going to be significant later on. He says a whole lot of things when he speaks to Peter. Then he does a miraculous thing again. He tells Peter the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. He keeps on speaking to him. He tells Peter a little bit about how John is also going to live his life. He says to him that he knows what it is, but it's no concern of Peter. And then it just reminds us in verse 25 that Jesus did many other things. If everything were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. Just an interesting comment. Sometimes if you mark all the things that Jesus does, you ask yourself, but what do I learn from this? What do I see? And what is very significant for me when I read through this and trying to figure out what the answer is to that, what do I realize from this text, what Jesus is doing and what is said and so on, is that I see two clear images. The two natures of Jesus comes out quite clearly in this passage. He is fully God. He does miracles. He knows the destiny of Peter and John. And he's fully man. He calls out to them. He speaks to them. He has breakfast on the beach with them. So this is a wonderful passage for me, just to read in terms of seeing how God, or how Jesus lived out his last days, even in his resurrection body. And it's clear that he is still fully God and fully man, which is exactly the kind of Savior that we expect. When we look at the very first verse, the word appear there is not better translated, but definitely translated as reveal. In John 1:31, in John 2:11, and John 17:6, the word, it's the same word that is being used. It often speaks of, in 2 verse 11, for example, they refer to the wedding at Canaan, and after the miracle that Jesus did there, he did it so that he can reveal his glory. And it's the same kind of word. So we sort of expect, yes, Jesus did appear, in his resurrection body. He sort of appears behind locked doors, and now he appears here. But it also wants to reveal something. And as we just saw, one of the things that it clearly reveals in this passage is that he is fully God and fully human. Verse 3 says, I'm going to go out fishing, and Simon Peter told them, and they said, well, we'll go with you. So they went out, got into the boat, but they didn't catch anything. One thing that is interesting is that some people think that after the resurrection that Peter and some of the disciples have abandoned their faith. They have given up on Jesus Christ, and now they have gone back to their old profession. That is, I can't see that happening. I can't see how that is true for this text. They are certainly not abandoning their faith. They are expecting. They are waiting for Jesus Christ, because Jesus instructed them to go to Galilee, and I will meet you there. If you read back in Luke's Gospel, when Jesus rose from the dead, he met the 3 women, and he told them, tell the disciples, I will wait for them in Galilee. So this is where they are. This is what they're doing. Peter is very much expecting to see Jesus here. They are certainly not wanting to abandon faith. Then what could be interesting is that some people have noted that there's a contrast here between verse 3 and verse 4. The contrast mainly is about darkness and light, an imagery that John has often referred to. He uses darkness and light also when Jesus met with Nicodemus. Nicodemus came at night, which was some indication of his spiritual position. His spiritual position was that of darkness. He didn't quite understand, the truth about Jesus Christ. And then Jesus is the light of the world. So here, whether it's intentional or not, it's just an interesting observation that in verse 3, that they went out, got in the boat, but that night they didn't catch anything. Yes, the best time of the day to catch a lot of fish is at night. But also, it might be that the disciples didn't quite understand still who Jesus was, and that's why spiritually they were still maybe still in the dark, even at this point. But then when Jesus comes on the scene, it's early morning, and he brings the light, so to speak. I won't make too much of it, but it's just an interesting observation that you could have. I just want to move forward with my mouse. If you can just excuse me, I think I've got a bit of a technical. There we go. So one other thing that's not obvious from what Jesus does in verse 5, he calls out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? In the Greek, there's a way that you construct a question that you actually expect the answer to be no. And that's very difficult to translate into English. You usually hear that in your tone of voice when an English person says, ask a question, and you sort of expect, did you meet the Queen? That kind of thing. And where in the tone of voice, you really expect him to hear the answer is no, I haven't. But in the Greek, you can actually construct a sentence in such a way, and this is an example of that. Jesus expected the answer to be no. He asked the question, but he already knows that even though they are 90 meters into the ocean far away, he's not been on the boat. He knows that they haven't caught anything. So again, his foreknowledge or his sovereignty or his godly nature has come out there. It's clear that he knows that they haven't caught anything. And it's just an interesting observation if you understand the Greek a little bit. 21 verse 6, this scene is reminiscent of a scene that happened back early days. It's recorded to us in Luke 5. Throw your nets out to the right side of the boat and you will find some fish. And when they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. This has happened before between Jesus and the disciples. It's something that he repeats. I think it helps to cement the fact that now it's only the third time that Jesus is speaking to them or revealing himself after his resurrection, and he's going to do this one thing that he's done before, just sort of to let them know it really is me talking. Then we jump down to verse 11. Verse 11 talks about a particular number of fish. So, it's a miraculous amount. It's a big haul of fish for that kind of small net, for that kind of small boat, and so on. And they counted and they come up with the number 153. Now, some people want to make a lot about the number 153, and for this, I'm going to jump here to D.A. Carson's commentary on John, which I highly recommend. And you can see that this is just, it's halfway down the discussion already about all the different kinds of interpretations of the number 153. I'll read the highlighted bit. He says that 153 is the triangular number. They go on to prove the triangular number in previous discussions. Is the triangular number of 17, did not escape the church fathers even. So Augustine noted and observed that 17 is 10 and 7, the 10 representing the 10 commandments, and the 7, the sevenfold Spirit of God. Others break 7 down into 3 and 4, the number of the Trinity and the number of Jerusalem, the city built on 4 square. Others have observed that 153 is 3 times 50 plus 3, the double 3 pointing to the Trinity, and so on and so on and so on. And then the comment right at the bottom here says, many other suggestions have been put forward, but none very convincing. My point here is that you shouldn't get sidetracked with the numbers, specifically in this, with the 153. Don't. The explanations around the 153 is not even closely related to the passage. I think the answer, the very helpful comment from Carson at the end of the day, is that the 153 is given. They give that number to heighten the reality of the miracle. If you're impressed with a number, then or with the size of something, then to put numbers to it, just put it into perspective, and you know exactly, how many were there? Were there 100 or 80 or 70? No, 153, which just, the exact number just heightens the reality. So my suggestion is don't get too sidetracked with the number 153. You can make that say anything. But if the question is, what would the original receivers of this letter have done with 153? They would certainly not have understood Hebrew, and you would have had to understand, some Hebrew, because the Hebrew letters would, of 153, each have a numerical value. The words of Hebrew have numerical values, and you add them up, you get to 153, and all kind of things. They would never think about those things. They would read 153 and they would say, oh my goodness, this really is a miracle. So let's not interpret or put meaning into a text that the original receivers would not have done. That's very irresponsible. But anyway, that's just a side note. So let's not make too much of the number. But the number is given in order for us to say, wow, that really is a big catch. If you understand maybe how small the boat was, or how fickle or small the net was, then that really was a miraculous catch. The last thing to say is that in 21 verse 13, Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them. Now, just like the catch, when that referred to Luke 5, the fact that it happened before. Here, Jesus does one more thing that happened before. It refers back to John 6, where on the shore of the same Sea of Galilee, Jesus fed the 5,000 and did a miraculous feeding with the same kind of things, fish and bread. And here again, he is handing out fish and he's handing out bread. Let's move on to the next sort of scene. The scene here is where Jesus is speaking to Peter. And what he's saying is, he asks him a question: do you love me? More than these, meaning more than these disciples. After this breakfast, Jesus moves his focus to Simon Peter. He asks him the same question 3 times. Do you love me? In verse 17, do you love me? Now, the question again here is, what is the point of this message? What would the original receivers have gotten when they read this? What was John's intention in writing this particular message or story for us as readers? Some people want to make much of the fact that John uses 2 different Greek words to explain the kind of love that Jesus is requiring and that Peter is willing to admit that he has for Jesus. Jesus asks you, do you love me? Do you phileo love me? The first 2 times. And Peter answers every time, well, you know that I phileo love you. Now, I'm not convinced that there is a message there for us at all, actually. John uses those 2 words, agape and phileo, interchangeably throughout the gospel. I deal with this, I don't have the time here, but I deal with that quite well in the sermon, which you can find the link of at the bottom of this video. So if you want to learn more about why I don't think that is a useful sidetrack, to a red herring really, to follow, then you can just listen to that section of the sermon. What I do think is useful is what I think the original receivers would have spotted. And what Jesus is doing here is extremely loving. It's extremely caring. What he's doing here is the public reinstatement of Peter to ministry. Peter denied him publicly in the previous chapters in John's Gospel. He denied knowing Jesus 3 times. And that severed their relationship. It ruined the possibility of ministry in the kingdom. But Jesus here reinstates him. He restores the relationship 3 times, also in public. And I think that is a far more useful way to look at that passage. Jesus will restore. First of all, Jesus will restore his disciples whenever they fail, but also he is willing to use imperfect people like you and me and Peter to do his work here on earth. Then verse 18, I've marked it also in a light yellow just to indicate that it's also, it shows a characteristic of Jesus. It says, very truly I tell you, when you were younger and dressed yourself and went where you wanted, but one day when you're old, someone else will dress you and lead you where you don't want to go. That verse is again Jesus' foreknowledge. It shows some kind of characteristic together with all the other things that Jesus didn't say, and it reveals to us again his godly nature, the fact that he knows the destiny, that he knows the future of Peter. He knows the kind of role that he's calling Peter to, and in the same way, you and I also have a role to play, and Jesus knows exactly what our role is and what our destiny will be, and all he asks of us is that we should follow him. That is very important. So just to, up until this point in the passage, let's break it up into meaning blocks. The first meaning block goes from 1 to 14, and 1 to 14 I've labeled it in summary as the miraculous catch, and Jesus can be identified as both fully God and fully man. The second mini block goes from verse 15 up until verse 19, and my summary of that is that Jesus restores a disciple to ministry. And that brings us to the third meaning block. The third meaning block, I summarize it as the disciples that spreads fake news. Once again, it talks about how they misunderstand Jesus' exact words. Maybe there's a little lesson in for us. We must make sure that we listen to Jesus' exact words, not just, roughly, I think he said this, or I hear someone else said that I think he said this. Let's be very specific, because they did spread false news about the gospel of John, who wrote the gospel, that they thought that he would not die. But that's not what Jesus said. He said, if I wanted him to remain alive until I return, what is it to you, Peter? But anyway, so it also points out that the disciples are normal human beings. They have fall for the old broken telephone trap, and they hear one thing, and then the tale gets told in a more fantastic way, which leads to rumors throughout the disciples and throughout the believers of that era or that time. So we are in good company if we make mistakes. Jesus uses broken people and imperfect people to be his disciples. And then the last two sections, it's marked my summary of the last two verses. Verse 24, this is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down, and we know that his testimony is true. That is a legal attestation of a witness. At the end of a legal document, oftentimes there's an attestation of the witness to say that he can be trusted. The fact that there's a we know that this testimony is true. A couple of explanations on that. Suddenly John jumps from I, because he is the disciple who wrote it down, to we. He does this regularly in his gospel. In the first two chapters, he does that quite regularly. So he jumps from between I and we came to see his glory, but I have come to write these things down, but we have seen his glory. So it could be just one of those, or it could be that some of John's disciples finished off that letter, edited, and said, we know that this disciple's testimony is true, which is not an uncommon thing to happen. The very last section, meaning block, I've summarized it as Jesus is more wonderful than we can ever imagine. And although this is the very last verse that John writes for his gospel, but it is certainly worth us spending a lot of meditation, a lot of time thinking and pondering about this great verse. Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written. Don Carson says that the world would be a far too small a library for all the things that Jesus has done, because he is he is the person, he is the God that John starts his gospel with. In 1 verse 1, he is the Word, the incarnate Word. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made. There's much to be said about, even though we think we know who Jesus is, whatever we think about it, and whatever idea we have about him, is just a drop in the ocean. There's so much more to discover. There's so much more to journey with. There's so much more to trust in. There's so much more to praise and to glorify than we can ever imagine. May the rest of your life be spent trying to find out more and more and more about this wonderful Jesus that has been revealed in this marvelous gospel, the Gospel of John.